I've just gone live. Let's. I have no idea what's going on. I am just alerting people to the presence of this stream, and there we go. Then we go to here. And then we go to here as well, and we go to Blue Sky, and we do that, and we post there, and then yay, hello to people. Welcome to How to Shave Your Yak. So this is a Christmas story that I wrote, and I do speaking. Most people probably know I speak at conferences and stuff, and I was invited to speak at NDC's Christmas party or Christmas Julebord. And they said, "What are you going to do?" And I thought, I'm going to write a Christmas story. Yes. Hi, Surly Dev. I'm going to write a Christmas story, and I have never written any of my talks. I work out what I want to say, and I get up on stage and I start talking. And this time I wrote a whole book, and yeah, it's got like pages and everything. It's all been properly bound and everything. So, and this is it. I am very well, thank you, Surly. So here we go. How to Shave Your Yak. Once upon a time, there was an elf named Susan. Susan was not one of the cool elves like in Lord of the Rings. She didn't have a bow and arrow or an out-of-control superiority complex or anything. No, Susan was a Christmas elf with the tunic and the tights and the hat with a bell on it and everything. Susan was sitting at the kitchen table with her mum and dad, trying to decide what she wanted to do in Santa's workshop. "I'd love to be a toy maker," she said, "making all the shiny toys for the children to unwrap on Christmas morning, bringing a little joy into their lives." "There's not a lot of call for toy makers these days," said her dad. "Most of the toys these days are electronics. So Santa's outsourced manufacturing to Foxconn." "What about gift wrapping?" asked Susan's mum. "That's a good career. Your granddad won awards for his gift wrapping." Susan sighed. "I want to do something creative, though, and also I fear paper cuts." "You could work in the software department with me," suggested Dad. "There are lots of jobs going." "But I don't know anything about software," said Susan. "That's no problem. You can just do a pointy-toed boot camp. It'll teach you everything you need to know in 6 weeks. Susan thought that sounded unlikely, but she was bored of the conversation, and tonight's Christmas movie was starting soon, and it was Die Hard. Yes, Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Yes, it is. It's set at a Christmas party, there's Christmas music, and Bruce Willis writes, "Now I have a machine gun, ho, ho, ho," on a dead guy. And so it was, on the 2nd of January, Susan logged into Teams and joined the induction meeting. "Welcome to Pointy-Toed Boot Camp," boomed the instructor, a jolly old elf with a beard you could lose a cat in. "In just 6 weeks, I'm going to turn all of you into full-stack developers, ready to help make Santa's software the best in the North Pole." But nobody could hear him because he was on mute. "You're on mute," said somebody, but they were also on mute. Susan unmuted herself and said, "You're on mute" again, but the instructor had his volume turned down too. She opened the chat window and typed "You're on mute," but got a message saying guests are not permitted to post in this group, which was weird because she had a bootcamp account. She clicked the account button and saw that Teams had decided to use her personal account to connect to the chat for some reason. She logged out of her personal account completely, clicked OK to restart Teams, waited 5 minutes, then clicked the Teams button on the taskbar and got a message saying Teams is already running, but it wasn't showing up in Task Manager, so she restarted Windows, waited while it installed the 24H2 update, clicked skip on all the pages telling her to switch to Bing and send Microsoft optional telemetry, got to the desktop, and finally opened Teams, which automatically logged into her personal account again. Finally, Susan rejoined the meeting using Teams in the browser, wondering if she'd missed anything important. Fortunately, the instructor had unmuted himself, but was clearly using the crap microphone built into the webcam so nobody could hear anything, and the other elves were trying to explain to him that he needed to click the drop-down part of the mic button and choose the headset mic. Eventually, everything got sorted out, and the elves started the front-end module, learning HTML and CSS and JavaScript, which actually meant HTML and Tailwind and React, because they were industry standard, and it was North Policy to use whatever ThoughtWorks were using. Okay, so in your terminal windows, I want you to run npx dgit redux.js/redux-templates/packages/v-template-redux space my-app and then cd space my-app and then npm space install, said the instructor. 24 elves obediently followed these instructions and crashed the Arctic internet trying to download 4.5 gigabytes of JavaScript. The Pointy Toad bootcamp continued like this for 6 weeks. By the time it had finished, Susan had learnt how to build a to-do app using React and Redux with a back-end API written in Express.js, deployed to AWS, and storing data in MongoDB because it's web scale. She got a certificate saying she was a full-stack rockstar developer and approved to work in Santa's software workshop. 2 weeks later, Susan arrived bright and early for her first day. She couldn't wait to get started and wondered what kind of software she would be building first. She presented herself at the reception desk in the lobby. "Hi, I'm Susan. I start work here today," she told the receptionist, a bored-looking elf who was looking at her with one eye while the other stared at his phone. "I'm sorry," he said. "I said I'm Susan," started Susan, but he interrupted her. "No, I heard what you said. I'm just sorry. I'll call someone to come and get you." After a few minutes, a cheery-looking elf popped her head round a door and called, "Susan, I'm Veronica. Come here, dear. I'll get you all settled in." Susan followed her through a door into an open-plan office that seemed to go on forever in all directions, row upon row of desks stretched into the distance, each with a monitor, keyboard, and mouse. "Follow me," bubbled Veronica happily and set off into the sea of desks. "We have a lovely canteen that does breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so if you're here from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., you can get all your meals for free. These fridges," she indicated a tall glass-fronted fridge packed with cans of Monster and Red Bull, "are all free. Help yourself to as much as you like." They passed an open area with a ping-pong table, with no net, paddles, or balls. "If you want to play a team-building game of ping-pong, you just need to pop by my desk and sign out the equipment. We want our employees to have fun," said Veronica happily. They finally came to an area with a sign reading "The Naughty Ninjas" in 800-point Comic Sans, where half a dozen team members were hunched in their seats, tapping keyboards and clicking mouses. "You'll be joining this team. Albert here is the team lead. He'll get you started," said Veronica, already briskly walking away to bestow her bubbly benevolence on another unwilling victim. "Oh, yay, another team member," said Albert. "Okay, sit yourself down at this desk and I'll requisition you a laptop." He opened his browser to a form with many, many fields and started filling it out, occasionally asking Susan questions like, "Do you prefer Windows or Mac?" Or, "Do you want something decent but incredibly heavy?" Or something light but shit. Shortly before lunch, he finally clicked the Submit Request button, opened the confirmation email and told Susan, "Right, that should be ready in a couple of weeks. It's okay if you want to work from home till it turns up." "But how can I work if I don't have a laptop?" "You can't. When I said work from home, I meant sit around in your pajamas eating cookies and binge-watching Netflix." 2 weeks later, Susan arrived bright and early for her first day of actually programming with an actual laptop. She practically sprinted to the Naughty Ninjas cluster of desks, where Albert was waiting with an enormous black laptop for her. He showed her how to connect it to the monitor and keyboard and watched while she turned it on, and it booted to the login screen. "Oh, bother," he said. "I forgot to request a new login for you. I'll have to fill out the form." 2 weeks later, Susan arrived bright and early for her first day of actually programming with an actual laptop and an actual account on the network. She logged into her laptop and was presented with a company portal that looked like it had been designed by a committee of blind people who had long ago given up on life and just wanted it to stop now, please. "Right, said Albert. You'll need to click on the magenta induction button and complete the onboarding training. It's just the basic stuff. Information security workshop policies, GDPR, all that stuff. Should only take a few days. 2 weeks later, Susan arrived bright and early for her first day of actually programming with an actual laptop, an actual account on the network, and no more onboarding to complete. Right, said Albert. We're about to start the next sprint refinement session, so grab your laptop and follow us. The team slowly rose from their chairs and headed for a meeting room made entirely of frosted glass. Once inside, Susan saw that the walls were covered with diagrams, notes, and a heartfelt comment on the futility of existence, which had been signed Steve. Everybody sat around the table in the centre of the room and opened their laptops. I'll send you a link to the planning poker, said Albert, and a minute later a very, very long URL appeared in the team's chat. Susan clicked it and was taken to a page titled Planning Poker Plus, open parens, non-commercial use only, close parens. Ignore that, said Albert. Let's see what's on top of the backlog. His laptop was connected to the big screen at the end of the table, with a page covered with cards spread across a multitude of columns with headers reading Backlog, To Do, Doing, In Review, Ready for Testing, Testing, In Test Review, Ready for UAT, UAT, UAT Review, Ready for Production, and Production. He double-clicked the card at the top of the backlog and it opened the full ticket. The title read, As Santa, I want to share the naughty list with my little helpers so they can deliver the lumps of coal for me and I can be finished before February. That would probably be a good starter ticket for you, said Albert, scrolling the description up and down in a way that almost certainly made it impossible to read. It's just running a database query and rendering the results to a printable page. Think you can handle that? I guess probably, hazarded Susan. Excellent, said Albert. So, how many points is it? Points? Asked Susan. Did you not learn Scrum on your pointy-toed boot camp? Albert sighed, his face betraying his deep disappointment with this state of affairs. No, Susan admitted. Okay, well, it's very simple. We work in 2-week sprints. The first day is spent planning what we're going to try and do. We go through the backlog and agree on points for each story so we can commit to a realistic set of goals for the sprint. Got it, said Susan. Right, so on the planning poker page, you just need to click the number of points you think this story is worth. And how long is a point? No. Points are not a measure of time, explained Albert. It's impossible to estimate how long something will take. Points represent complexity. Susan looked at the little cards on her screen. They were numbered strangely. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, and question mark. Why are the numbers all random? She asked. They're not random. It's the Fibonacci sequence. Just pick the one you think matches the complexity of the story. How do I decide that? I don't really know anything about the system. Can you choose for me this time? No, the person doing the work has to choose the points. Just pick whatever feels right to you. Susan stared at the screen for a minute, then shrugged and clicked the 3 card. Everyone else clicked on their laptops. Then Albert read out the points. Okay, we have a 3 from Susan, an 8 from Bob, 13 from Stan, 55 from Alex, and 1 from Fred. Really, Fred? You think you could do this in one morning? I thought points didn't mean time, said Susan. That's right, they don't, said Albert. If something isn't very complicated, then you can probably do it in the morning. If it's more complicated, it will take longer, obviously. So how long does a 3-point story take? Probably a couple of days. Oh, can I change my answer? No, it's locked in now. So I have to do this in 2 days? No, Albert laughed. Of course not. We just take the midway point between the highest and lowest scores, which makes this an 8, he explained, typing 8 into the estimate field on the JIRA ticket and clicking the save button. Does that mean it should take 6 days? Asked Susan. More like a month for an 8, said Albert. It's non-linear. Susan made it through the rest of the meeting by clicking the 8 card for almost every story, switching to a 5 or 13 occasionally, so it would look like she knew what was going on. After they had estimated all the stories, Albert started moving them into the to-do column, adding up the points for each card as he went. We did 60 points in the last sprint with 5 of us, so that means we should be able to do 72 points in this sprint with Susan's help, he announced. Now, go and have lunch, and then we'll do the retrospective and review. The Retrospective and review were so boring as to defy description, which is why they are not documented here. You're welcome, children. The next day, Susan opened her laptop and was about to start work when Albert called, "Stand up time," and the team trudged back into the frosted glass room and sat down. Okay, Susan, so in this meeting, we just say what we did yesterday, what we're going to do today, and whether we have any blockers. What's a blocker? It's a thing that stops you from completing your story. Oh, okay. They went around the table and everybody explained that they had spent the entire day yesterday in the planning, review, and retrospective meetings, and that today they would be finishing up the stories that had been carried over from the last sprint, and had incredibly in-depth two-person conversations about blockers while the rest of the room stared off into space. It was 11 o'clock when the meeting finally finished, and they wandered back to their desks. Albert sent Susan a link to a GitHub repository called Naughty Service Backend with instructions on how to clone it in her laptop and open it in code. When she got it open, she saw all the files had CS and CSproj extensions. "What are these files?" she asked Albert. "Oh, yeah, we use C# for the backend services. Did you do C# on your pointy toad boot camp?" he asked hopefully. "No, just JavaScript." "That's fine, they're very similar. Curly braces, semicolons, that sort of thing. You'll pick it up. You can go and grab a book from the continuous learning library if you want." At the start of the second sprint, Susan had learned C# and ASP.NET Core and was ready to start on the story. Nobody seemed bothered that she hadn't completed it in the first sprint, and it rolled over to the next with a few others. "Where's the database I need to query against?" she asked. "It's a MySQL database running in Azure SQL database. You can connect to the development instance as long as you're on the workshop network or connected to our VPN," said Albert, and he sent her another very long URL that took her to a page in the Azure portal. "What's MySQL?" "Pointy Toad Boot Camp?" asked Albert with a complete absence of hope. "We just did MongoDB." "Right, well, it's nothing like that at all. But you'll pick it up. You can go and grab a book," Albert started, but Susan was already heading for the library. At the start of the third sprint, Susan had learned about MySQL and relational databases and tables and columns and indexes and was ready to start on the story. She added a new action method to the Naughty controller that connected to the database and ran a select to get all the data for the current year and returned the results as an HTML table, then pushed her branch to GitHub, opened a pull request, and moved the Jira ticket into the In Review column. A few hours later, she got a notification telling her that comments had been left on her PR, so she clicked the link and took a look. "Query only returns IDs and Naughty scores. API needs to return full details of child." Susan dug into the database schema, found a table called children, and joined it into her select statement, so the query also returned the names of the naughty little boys, girls, and beans who would be getting coal for Christmas that year, then marked the review comment as resolved. The next afternoon, she got a notification telling her that comments had been left on her PR, so she clicked the link and took a look. "Joining to children isn't allowed. Children must be accessed through the children microservice." Leaving aside that frankly problematic sounding sentence, Susan inquired as to where she could find the children microservice. Stan sent her a link to another GitHub repo, which she did not have permission to access, so she opened a request in the service desk and went home for another week of Netflix and cookies. At the start of the fourth sprint, Susan had been given read permission on the children microservice repo, where the README provided a list of URLs for the service running in each of the dev, test, UAT, pre-prod, and prod environments. She put the dev URL into her browser and got a 404 page not found error. "Why does it say page not found?" she asked. "Oh, you have to put swagger/index.html on the end to get the API docs up," Fred told her. She added the path and pressed enter again and found an endpoint that just took an ID parameter and returned a child's details. There was no way to get a list of children from a list of IDs, so she had to add an API call for every row returned from the naughty table to get the children's details one by one. This took the time to run the query from a few seconds to 14 hours, which Albert said was too slow. Looking at her code, he suggested running the API calls concurrently, which involved a list of tasks of children and a call to task.whenAll. Susan made the change and tested her code again, sending 250 million concurrent requests to the Children API and crashing something called a Kubernetes cluster. After a few days of trial and error, Susan discovered that the Children API could cope with around 2,000 concurrent requests, and that she could only use a tenth of those to save capacity for other consumers. So she changed her code to run 200 requests at a time, which meant the API call completed in just over 4 minutes. Rendering the HTML table and downloading it to the browser took another 30 seconds, and Albert said that anything under 5 minutes was a win in his book, so he approved the PR, and the ticket moved into the Ready for Testing column. 6 weeks later, the ticket briefly moved into the testing column, then reappeared in the to-do column with a new comment attached. Page does not load when using testing database. How am I supposed to fix that? Asked Susan. You have to go into the logs to find the error, said Stan, and sent her a link to a thing called Splunk. The library didn't have any books about Splunk, so she asked Albert how she could query it. I'm not the Splunk expert. You need to speak to Steve in means testing. After a long search, Susan discovered the means testing team in a fenced-off cubicle in the dark corner of the office. The means testing team, it turned out, consisted entirely of Steve, a haunted-looking elf with a twitching eye who smelled faintly of eggnog. Can you show me how to use Splunk? She asked. Steve's face lit up. Oh, yes, that would be wonderful, he cried, sweeping a pile of sweet wrappers and post-it notes off his desk and beckoning her closer. He opened Splunk and showed her how to find the error from her page, which had apparently caused an out-of-memory exception trying to build a 1 trillion-line HTML file. Thanks for your help, she said, turning to leave. Oh, do you have to go? Steve looked distraught. I could show you how to correlate the Splunk logs with metrics in Prometheus. Are you okay? I'm fine, Steve groaned. What are you working on? There's a logic reversal somewhere in the means testing algorithm that means all the children with rich parents get the nice expensive toys and all the poor children get a yo-yo and a tangerine. I've been trying to fix it since 1957. Somehow it's survived 4 complete rewrites. Susan made her excuses and left, promising to visit soon if she had the time. She went back to her desk and changed the code so that the page would render to a file and then send that as the response, which seemed to work, so she put the ticket back into Ready for Testing. 2 weeks later, it was back in the to-do column. Page does not print correctly. There was no more information. Sighing, Susan ran the application, browsed to her page, and went to play ping-pong with Alex while it loaded. When she came back, she clicked the print button and went off to find the printer. Looking at the first page, she could see the problem. There was no wrapping, so only the first 5 columns of the 60 or so in the table were actually printing. Sighing, she went back to her desk and tried to figure out how to get table rows to wrap. Where's the Tailwind file? She asked. We don't use Tailwind, Fred told her. We use Bootstrap. How do you get table rows to wrap when you print them with Bootstrap? I have no idea. We generally convert everything to PDF if it needs printing. Susan headed to the library. Just before the end of that sprint, Susan again tested her new page, downloading the 40-gigabyte PDF file and sending it to the printer. She wandered over to where it had been before, only to find an empty space on the table. Where's the printer? She asked a passing elf. Oh, some idiot tried to print 5 million pages of HTML and we couldn't clear the print queue, so we had to scrap the printer. New one should be here in a week or 2. At the start of the 11th sprint, a shiny new printer was delivered, but it turned out that some idiot had tried to print a 40-gigabyte PDF, so that one had to be scrapped too. How are we supposed to print this list out if the printer can't handle the file size? She complained. Why don't you add a form that lets elves type in the country and city name and just return the data for that? Said Albert. Different cities are handled by different teams anywhere, so they can just print what they need. Shouldn't that have been in the original requirement? Oh, we try not to overanalyze requirements because we're agile, explained Albert. So Susan rewrote her code to get a list of children IDs for a given country and city, then used that to filter the data returned from the naughty table and checked her results. It worked for every city except Oslo, which had a lot of naughty children, so she wrote some special case code to split that into 3 PDFs and put the ticket back in the Ready to Test column. This time it only took 4 weeks for the testers to check her work, and the ticket moved into the In Test Review column. What do we do now? She asked. Oh, just move it into the ready for UAT column. In test review doesn't really mean anything, said Alex, shedding a single tear. So Susan moved the ticket. And how do I get the code into UAT? Well, we do DevOps and continuous integration and deployment. So now that your code has been merged and built, you just need to update the version number in the GitHub action and deploy it to the Kubernetes cluster. Wow, that's really clever, said Susan. Yeah, only joking. You actually need to continuously integrate the app on your laptop, put the publish output in a zip file with the version number in the name, copy it to the F drive, and then email the DevOps team so they can continuously deploy it for you. The DevOps team? Asked Susan, but Alex was quietly banging her head against her desk and muttering darkly, so Susan left her alone. Halfway through the 18th sprint, Susan got an email from the DevOps team informing her that her changes had been continuously deployed and were ready for user acceptance testing. When will the users test it? She asked. Oh, the users don't have time to test anything. Just run a few tests of your own and then it can go to production, Albert reassured her. So Susan ran her tests again, except this time against the UAT version of the service, and everything worked, so she moved the ticket into UAT review and then, making an educated guess, straight into ready for production. She rebuilt the app, zipped up the publish folder into a file with the version number and prod in capital letters in the name, and sent another email to the DevOps team. In the last week in November, her changes were finally deployed to production, where it promptly crashed. Checking the logs, Susan found an out-of-disk space error. It says it's running out of disk space, she told Albert. Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. The production containers only have a few megabytes of disk space. If you need more, you'll have to mount a file share from Azure Storage. And how do I do that? Well, you'll need to create a storage account, create a file share in that, then update the Kubernetes file for our service to mount it as a volume. Susan opened the Azure portal and went to create a new storage account, but when she clicked create after filling in the 8 pages of the wizard, it told her she didn't have permission to create resources. I can't create anything, she told Albert. No, nobody has permission to create anything through the portal. You have to write a Terraform file and open a PR on the infrastructure team's repository. This bit's true. Susan opened a request for write permission on the infrastructure repository and spent the next 2 weeks learning Terraform. Eventually, she coded the Azure storage module properly and opened a PR. Almost immediately, a comment was added. This is all wrong. It'll be easier if I just rewrite it for you to apply our standard templates. And the PR was rejected. Completely true. Happened recently. After a week of checking the infrastructure repo once an hour to see if the module had been completed, it was finally there and the storage account was created on the next weekend. And so on Monday morning, Susan asked, how do I mount the file share into the container? You have to open a change request for the Kubernetes file with the DevOps team, said Fred. Can't I just make the change myself? No, the DevOps team use their local Team Foundation server to manage the Kubernetes files and they won't give anyone else access. So Susan sent the DevOps team a change request and, in an unusual flurry of industrious productivity, they made the change just in time for Boxing Day. After a well-earned Christmas break, Susan arrived at work and found an invitation to a strategy meeting. She grabbed a couple of cans of Jolt Cola, which only elves can get these days, and entered the meeting room. Ah, Susan, great job on the naughty children list, said Albert with a big smile. I know it was tough going sometimes, but you got there in the end. Anyway, we've just heard from the CTO that we're abandoning C# and ASP.NET Core and rewriting the entire system in Zig. 2 weeks later, Susan started her new job at the reindeer stables. Walking in, she found stalls containing some large, shaggy beasts that she was pretty sure were not reindeer. A tall, thin elf was tipping food pellets from a bucket into their troughs. Hi, I'm Susan. I'm here to help with the reindeer, said Susan. Oh, hi, Susan. I'm Eric. Let's get you started. Now, as you've probably noticed, these are not actually reindeer. Problem is, reindeer can't actually fly. Ridiculous, really, thinking they could, Eric chortled. So what we do is we use yaks instead. Big flyers, yaks. They love it. So we cut all their hair off, paint them brown, stick antlers to their horns, and no one's the wiser. You're new, so grab the clippers and get shaving. It's a crap job, but somebody's got to do it. Oh no, said Susan. This is perfect. And she lived happily ever after. There we go. Thank you for listening to my Christmas story. If you liked it, please click the like. If you hated it, don't just do anything at all. And it's 4:30 on Christmas Eve, and I am going to go and watch It's a Wonderful Life. So Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.